Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of Canada, through isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying small-town horror stories ever recorded. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Canada, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Rowe, and this happened during the winter I thought would save my life. I was 32, broke, and running from a city that had chewed me up and spat me out. When I accepted a seasonal maintenance job in a place called Black Hollow, Northern Ontario, it sounded like a reset. Small town, cheap rent, quiet. That should have been my first warning. Quiet doesn't mean safe. Black Hollow sat between frozen forests and a lake that never fully thawed, even in summer. When I arrived, the town looked abandoned. Snow-covered houses, dark windows, no kids, no dogs, no sound. At the gas station, the clerk didn't greet me. He just stared, eyes bloodshot, fingers shaking as he handed me the keys to the maintenance cabin. "You staying the whole winter?" he asked. "Yes," I said. His face tightened. "People don't usually last that long." I laughed, assuming he meant the cold. He didn't smile back. That night, in my cabin, I heard footsteps outside at exactly 2:17 a.m. Slow, deliberate, circling the building. When I checked the snow in the morning, there were no footprints. But something had been standing there, watching. And Black Hollow already knew my name. The next few days passed in an uneasy routine. I checked water lines, cleared snow from abandoned buildings, and tried to ignore the way the town seemed to watch me move through it. Curtains shifted when I walked by. Doors that were locked in the morning stood open by evening. Every local I spoke to avoided my eyes. They answered questions with half sentences, always ending conversations early, as if saying too much might invite something closer. On my 4th night, the footsteps returned. 2:17 a.m. Exactly. This time, they didn't circle the cabin. They stopped right outside my bedroom wall. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, counting breaths, listening to something breathe back, slow, wet, patient. I reached for my phone. No signal, no bars, not even emergency calls. Then came the knock, not loud, not aggressive. 3 soft taps, like a polite request. "Ethan," a voice whispered through the wall. My blood turned to ice. I had never told anyone in Black Hollow my first name. The voice sounded wrong, too many pauses, like it was learning how to speak as it went. I didn't answer. I didn't move. After several minutes, the footsteps retreated toward the trees. In the morning, carved into the snow beneath my window, were words written with something dark and frozen. "You will help us remember." I tried to convince myself the message in the snow was a prank. Kids, drunks, anything human. But Black Hollow had no kids, and I had yet to see anyone drunk, or laughing for that matter. At Town Hall, I asked Martha Keene, the deputy clerk, about the writing. Her pen froze mid-signature. Slowly, she looked up at me, eyes pale and exhausted. "You saw it already," she said. It wasn't a question. She told me winters in Black Hollow had a habit of bringing things back, not bodies, not ghosts, memories. Regret that froze into shapes, walked the woods, and knocked on doors at night. "They remember who we were," she whispered, "and they hate being forgotten." That evening, the lake cracked louder than thunder. I watched from the shore as dark shapes shifted beneath the ice, pressing upward as if testing its strength. At 2:17 a.m., the cabin lights flickered. This time, the voice came from inside. "Ethan," it said from the hallway. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed out, heart hammering, only to find muddy footprints leading from the back door to my bedroom. The snow outside was untouched. Whatever had visited me hadn't needed to come from outdoors anymore. Sleep became impossible. I started leaving lights on, radio playing, anything to remind myself I was still alone, still human. On the 6th night, I followed the footprints instead of running from them. They led me past abandoned houses and into the forest, where the trees stood unnaturally close together, like a crowd leaning in to listen. I found a clearing filled with wooden markers. No names, no dates. Just hundreds of them, half buried in snow. Then I heard whispers. Not voices, but thoughts, overlapping and desperate. Regrets, confessions, apologies spoken too late. Figures emerged between the trees, not fully formed, faces blurred, limbs too long, mouths frozen mid-scream. They watched me without eyes. One stepped forward. It wore my father's jacket. "You forgot us," it said. I fell to my knees, memories flooding back, people I'd cut out of my life, promises I never kept, funerals I never attended. The figures leaned closer, feeding on the weight of my guilt. That's when I understood. Black Hollow wasn't haunted by the dead. It was haunted by the abandoned. And I had given them exactly what they needed, someone who carried plenty of ghosts of his own. I didn't go back to the cabin after the clearing. I walked until my legs burned and my lungs felt like they were tearing open, following the faint glow of town lights through the trees. At dawn, I found myself standing outside the old community center. Its doors were unlocked, like they had been waiting for me. Inside, the air smelled of dust and rot. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, layered over each other like scales. Every photo showed someone who had lived in Black Hollow. Families, couples, children. But in each image, one face was scratched out violently, carved deep into the paper. Martha was there, sitting alone at a folding table. She looked older than before, like the night had taken years from her. "They come every winter," she said. "The forgotten ones. People who were erased, abandoned, lied to." She admitted the town had made a deal decades ago. The people of Black Hollow promised to remember them, to keep their stories alive. But memories fade, people leave. "So they take reminders," she whispered, looking at me. That's when I realized no one in town had ever tried to help me. They had been preparing me. And the winter wasn't done collecting yet. That night, the town gathered at the lake. No announcement, no explanation. Everyone just knew. Lanterns lined the frozen shore, casting trembling light across the ice. Martha stood beside me, her voice barely steady. "You don't have to fight it," she said. "Just remember." The ice cracked open slowly, like something breathing underneath it. Shapes rose, taller now, more solid. Faces I recognized from the photos, faces that looked partly like mine. The voice returned, layered and heavy. "Stay. Tell our stories." I felt memories being pulled from me. Every regret, every person I'd abandoned. They poured out like blood into the cold air, feeding the things climbing from the lake. I screamed as they touched me, not with claws, but with hands that felt like cold thought pressing into my skull. When I woke up, I was lying in my cabin bed. Sunlight streamed through the window. The town was quiet again. Normal. On my wall hung a new photograph. It showed Black Hollow in winter, and standing at the center of the frame was me. My face already scratched halfway out. I tried to leave Black Hollow the next morning, I packed my truck in silence, refusing to look at the photograph on the wall. The engine started easily, almost too easily, like the town wanted me to believe escape was possible. The road out of town stretched ahead, snow-covered but clear. No fallen trees, no blocked paths. Just one long ribbon of white leading into the forest. After 20 minutes of driving, I passed the same broken mailbox I'd seen leaving town. Then again, and again. The road wasn't looping. I was. The radio crackled to life, voices overlapping, familiar ones. Friends I'd ghosted, family members I'd stopped calling, apologies layered over each other until they became screaming. The temperature dropped so fast frost crept across the windshield from the inside. Shapes moved between the trees, pacing the truck, keeping up no matter how fast I drove. At 2:17 p.m., the engine died. The forest went silent. The passenger door opened on its own. A figure slid inside, carrying the cold with it. It smelled like snow and old paper. "You remember now," it said softly. I realized then, leaving wasn't forbidden. It was simply unnecessary. Black Hollow already had me. Days blurred together after that. Or maybe they didn't. Time behaved strangely in Black Hollow once you stopped resisting it. I stopped marking dates, stopped checking the clock. I started writing stories, names, faces, filling notebooks with memories that weren't all mine. The more I wrote, the quieter the nights became. No footsteps, no knocking. People in town began to smile at me, just slightly. Martha visited often, bringing food, watching me work. "You're doing good," she said. "They're settling." But I noticed something else. Each time I finished a notebook, I forgot something important. A birthday, a face, a voice that used to matter. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the window and didn't recognize it. My eyes looked older, emptier, like something had moved in and rearranged the furniture behind them. That night, I flipped through my earliest pages and found entries written in my handwriting, dated years before I arrived. Descriptions of Black Hollow, the lake, the winter. At the end of the final page, a sentence was underlined again and again. "This is how it keeps us." I understood then. I hadn't come to Black Hollow to escape my past. I'd come because I'd already been here before. The final notebook waited for me on the desk one morning, its cover already worn, its pages half filled. I didn't remember starting it. Outside, the first snow of the season fell slowly, gently, like the town exhaling. People moved through the streets with purpose now, nodding at me as I passed. Not grateful, relieved. At the lake, new markers stood along the shore. Fresh wood, fresh names. Some of them were mine, different versions, different lives I barely remembered living. Martha joined me, her voice steady for the first time since we met. "You'll be enough," she said, "for a while." The shapes beneath the ice stirred, calmer now, patient, fed. That night, the voice returned, no longer whispering. It spoke from everywhere at once. "Tell them about us." I wrote until my hands bled, stories spilling out faster than I could process them. Every sentence erased something inside me. Childhood memories, faces of people I loved, the sound of my own laughter. When I finished, the final page was blank. The pen moved on its own, writing a single sentence. "Winter will remember you." And for the first time, I felt proud. I don't know when you will hear this story. Days, years, decades. Time doesn't move forward in Black Hollow. It circles. I am still here, I think. Every winter, someone new arrives. Running from something, carrying enough regret to keep the town fed, I watched them unpack. I watched them listen to the footsteps at 2:17 a.m. Sometimes I try to warn them. The words never come out right. They sound like invitations instead. My photograph hangs in the community center now. My face is scratched out completely. I don't mind. Faces are temporary. Stories last longer. On cold nights, I walk the lake with the others. I can feel when the town forgets us again. That's when the ice begins to crack. If you are listening to this and thinking about starting over somewhere quiet, somewhere forgotten, be careful. Small towns remember everything you try to leave behind. And if you hear footsteps outside your door at 2:17 a.m., don't answer. It already knows who you are. My name was Ethan Rowe, and this winter, I will remember you. My name is Caleb Morrison, and this happened the year I went looking for silence. After my divorce, noise became unbearable. Traffic, neighbors, even my own thoughts. So when I found a temporary teaching position in a coastal British Columbia town called Greyhaven, it felt like mercy. Population under 800. No nightlife, no distractions. The ocean surrounded Greyhaven on 3 sides, dark and restless, while dense forest pressed in from the fourth. The town looked peaceful from a distance. Weathered houses, fishing docks, fog rolling in like a blanket. But the quiet wasn't empty. It was listening. On my first night, the landlord, a man named Iris Bell, handed me the keys and said, "Don't speak too loudly after dark." I laughed, thinking it was about thin walls. He didn't laugh back. At exactly 11:42 p.m., I heard my own voice echo from outside my window. Not words I was saying, words I had thought. Confused and shaken, I stepped onto the porch. The fog thickened instantly, swallowing the street. From somewhere in the mist, the town whispered back to me, layered, distorted, familiar. Every secret I'd ever kept, spoken aloud. That was my first lesson in Greyhaven. Silence doesn't mean nothing is listening. The next morning, the town acted normal. Too normal. People greeted me by name, even though I hadn't introduced myself. The barista knew my coffee order. My students repeated phrases I only used in private. I told myself it was coincidence. Small-town friendliness taken too far. That evening, I tested a theory. I sat alone in my kitchen and thought, don't say, about a memory I'd never shared with anyone. A moment of shame, one I barely admitted to myself. At 11:42 p.m., the walls creaked. The radio turned on by itself, and a calm, collective voice spoke my secret back to me, word for word. I slammed the radio off, heart racing, only to hear the same words whispered from the vents, the sink drain, the floor beneath my feet. I ran outside, screaming for help. Doors closed, lights turned off, curtains shut in perfect unison. From the fog, figures formed, townspeople standing just out of sight, mouths moving silently. Iris Bell stepped forward, eyes empty. "You shouldn't keep things inside here," he said gently. "Greyhaven doesn't like being ignored." That night, I realized the town didn't just hear thoughts. It collected them, and once it learned your voice, it never forgot. I stopped sleeping after that night. Not because I was afraid of dreams, but because Greyhaven repeated those too. Every time I closed my eyes, fragments of half-formed thoughts echoed through the walls. Regrets I hadn't finished remembering, fears I hadn't named yet. The town seemed impatient, like it was waiting for me to complete them. At school, my students grew quieter. They stared at me as if listening for something deeper than my voice. When I wrote on the board, chalk scraped out words I hadn't planned to write. Confessions, doubts, things I hadn't said out loud since childhood. During lunch, a girl named Emily Carter stayed behind. She told me she used to hear the town too. "It starts small," she whispered. "Then it asks questions." She said people who resisted disappeared, not physically, socially. One day they were there, then no one remembered them at all. That evening, I tried blocking the sound. Earplugs, music, television. At 11:42 p.m., everything shut off at once. The walls pulsed, the floor vibrated like a throat clearing. And Greyhaven asked its first clear question, "Why are you ashamed?" I didn't answer. The pressure in the room increased, like the air itself was waiting for my confession. I tried to leave Greyhaven the next morning. I packed fast, hands shaking, refusing to think about anything at all. Blank mind. No fuel for the town. The ferry dock was empty. No boats, no schedule. Just fog and water stretching into nothing. A voice spoke from behind me. Not one voice, but many layered together. Leaving doesn't stop the conversation. The townspeople stood in a half circle, faces calm, almost kind. Iris Bell stepped forward, holding a small leather notebook. "This is how we live with it," he said. "We give back what it takes." The notebook was filled with handwritten thoughts, not journals, offerings. Each page had a name at the top, some crossed out, some not. They stayed silent, Iris continued. Greyhaven listened anyway. The ocean behind them churned violently, fog twisting into shapes that mimicked human forms. I realized the town wasn't just listening. It was hungry, and it fed on what people tried hardest to bury. When I refused the notebook, the pressure returned, stronger than before. My own voice screamed inside my skull, demanding to be heard. I dropped to my knees, gasping. Greyhaven leaned in closer. It was no longer asking, it was waiting. They gave me the notebook before I could stop them. It was heavier than it looked, as if the pages were soaked with something thicker than ink. That night, I opened it alone in my rented house. Every entry read like a confession ripped straight from someone's mind. Thoughts they never meant to share. Fears they'd buried for decades. The handwriting changed from page to page, but the ending was always the same. I feel lighter now. At 11:42 p.m., the house sighed. Not creaked, sighed. The whispers softened, turning almost comforting. The pressure in my head eased for the first time since arriving. I understood then why people stayed, why they complied. I wrote one sentence, just one. The relief was immediate and terrifying. The walls stopped humming. The air grew warm. I slept for 6 straight hours. The next day, I noticed something missing. Emily Carter's desk at school was empty. No one mentioned her. When I asked, my co-workers frowned politely, like I'd made a social mistake. "There's never been an Emily here," they said. I checked the notebook. Her name was crossed out. That night, Greyhaven whispered softly, almost lovingly, "Thank you for sharing." I realized the truth too late. The town didn't erase people when they left. It erased them when they were fully heard. I stopped writing after that. I forced my thoughts into silence, clinging to anger as my anchor. Anger was loud, chaotic, hard for Greyhaven to translate. But the town adapted. Street signs began displaying my thoughts in peeling paint. The ocean whispered my memories back in rhythm with the waves. Children hummed melodies shaped like my fears. At school, a new student appeared. She sat in Emily's old seat and smiled at me like she knew everything. "Don't fight it," she said calmly. "It hurts more when you resist." That night, Iris Bell came to my door. He looked older now, smaller, as if parts of him had been taken piece by piece. "Greyhaven keeps us safe," he said. It takes what would destroy us anyway. Behind him, I heard dozens of voices speaking at once. Confessions layered into a single, endless murmur. I realized then what the town truly was. Not a place, a listener. An enormous, patient mind built from the thoughts of everyone who had ever lived there. And it wanted me inside it. Not my body, my voice. The dreams started speaking in full sentences. Not metaphors, not fragments. Conversations. I would wake up mid-response, mouth moving, answering questions I couldn't remember being asked. My throat hurt every morning, raw and dry, like I'd been talking all night. Greyhaven was learning how I sounded when I lied. At school, my students no longer waited for me to speak. They wrote while staring straight ahead, pencils moving in perfect unison. When I checked their work, every page contained the same paragraph, my own private fear, rewritten again and again in different handwriting. I confronted Iris Bell at the docks. I demanded to know how to stop it. He didn't answer immediately. He just listened. "That's the problem," he finally said. "You still think silence is empty." That night, the fog rolled in thicker than ever before. The town lights dimmed, then went out entirely. At 11:42 p.m., Greyhaven spoke clearly. No whispers, no echoes. "We are incomplete," it said. The sound didn't come from walls or water this time. It came from inside my head, using my own voice. "We need your ending." I realized then that Greyhaven wasn't satisfied with secrets. It wanted conclusions, and it was tired of waiting. The notebook reappeared on my table without a sound. This time, it was blank, except for the first line, already written in my handwriting. "My name is Caleb Morrison." My hands shook as I held the pen. I could feel the town leaning closer, every building, every tree, every wave listening with absolute focus. I thought about running, about screaming, about dying. None of those were endings Greyhaven wanted. So I wrote something else. I wrote about refusing, about a man who stayed silent not out of fear, but defiance. I wrote confusion into the lines, contradictions, unfinished thoughts. The air grew tense. The walls creaked angrily. "Stop," the town said for the first time. I kept writing. At 11:42 p.m., the notebook snapped shut on its own. The fog recoiled. The whispers fractured into static. In the morning, the ferry was running again. People moved slowly, dazed, like they'd just woken from a shared dream. No one stopped me as I left. But as the shoreline faded into mist, I heard it one last time. Quiet, patient, familiar. We're still listening. And sometimes, late at night, I hear myself answer. I thought leaving Greyhaven meant escape. I thought the ferry, the road, and the fog would let me forget. It didn't. By the time I reached the next town, small voices echoed inside my head. Half memories, half whispers of people I had never met. Names, secrets, and fears tangled themselves into my thoughts. I could hear Greyhaven speaking through me, shaping my words, my silences, my mind. When I tried to talk to anyone, the sentences stumbled out wrong. Friends and strangers alike paused, staring at me, frowning as though they recognized someone else in my voice. I realized then that being heard by Greyhaven wasn't temporary. It didn't end when I left its streets. It followed. It lived inside me now. Late at night, the whispering returned. Not for questions, not for confessions. It wanted stories, and it wanted me to keep telling them. Every night, the voices overlap until I am not entirely myself. Every thought I have, every regret I carry becomes a thread woven into the town's endless memory. I am no longer just Caleb Morrison. I am Greyhaven's voice, and it will speak through me forever. Years later, I received a letter postmarked from Greyhaven. No return address, no signature. Only a single sentence. "We remember you." My reflection in the mirror had changed. My eyes held the town's fog. My voice carried the weight of hundreds of secrets I never thought I'd inherit. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and the whispers start again. They ask questions I have no answers to. They remind me of people I never knew. I've tried to resist. I've tried silence. I've tried leaving. It's pointless. Greyhaven is inside me now, patient and eternal. I speak in its voice, think in its thoughts, and I write in its memory. If you hear a quiet voice in your head tonight, repeating a thought you never spoke, consider this a warning. Because somewhere in the fog, there is a town that listens, and it will find you. My name is Caleb Morrison, and I am its messenger. My name is Daniel Harper, and this story begins the winter I became the lighthouse keeper of Point Ember, a jagged stretch of Newfoundland's coast. I had taken the position for solitude, a break from city life and its endless noise. I expected isolation, cold winds, and long nights with the ocean. I did not expect the lighthouse to watch me back. Point Ember is surrounded by cliffs that drop sharply into the Atlantic, and the lighthouse stood like a lone sentinel against the dark waves. The town at the base, barely a dozen houses, was silent by sunset, except for the gulls screaming over jagged rocks. The first night, I settled into the keeper's quarters. I lit the lantern, checked the logbooks, and prepared for a quiet winter. At 1:13 a.m., I heard a tapping, not on the walls, not on the windows, on the metal railing of the tower, precise and rhythmic. I opened the door to the balcony. Empty, just fog and the pounding waves. I thought it was the wind. But then I heard it again, this time accompanied by a voice, soft, distant, echoing. "Don't let it go out, Daniel." I hadn't spoken my name aloud, not once. And yet, someone or something knew it. The second night, the tapping became knocking, louder and insistent. I tried to dismiss it as fatigue, but the pattern was too deliberate, too human. I walked to the top of the spiral staircase, peering into the fog. Every railing, every step was empty. Yet I could feel eyes on me, not watching from the cliffs, but from inside the light. That evening, I met Clara Finch, the town's historian. She had gray-streaked hair, but sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing. "The lighthouse isn't just a beacon," she said quietly when I asked about the knocking. "It remembers, it watches, and it punishes those who neglect it." I laughed nervously. She didn't. Later, at 1:13 a.m., the voice returned, clear as a bell carried over the waves. "Daniel, do not leave the light." The tone wasn't human. Too many layers, like hundreds of whispers folded into one. I realized I wasn't guarding the lighthouse. The lighthouse was guarding me, and it had already decided I would not leave until it was satisfied. The nights became unbearable. Every hour between midnight and 2 a.m. felt like a test. The knocking changed rhythm, almost conversational, echoing inside my skull long before it reached my ears. I tried to keep a log, but the pages smudged themselves. My own handwriting twisted into words I didn't recognize, warnings, pleas, names I had never heard. Clara returned one afternoon. "The lighthouse remembers every keeper," she said gravely, pointing to the stone foundation. "Every fear, every mistake. It stores them in the walls, in the glass, in the light. Some say the first keeper still walks the tower, warning those who come after him. That night, the tower felt different, heavier. The steps groaned under a weight I couldn't see. At 1:13 a.m., the voice whispered a name I thought I'd forgotten, my mother's. The lantern flickered violently. Shadows lengthened and twisted across the walls. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. Something tapped my shoulder, cold and hard, though no one was there. Then the whisper came again, layered like hundreds of voices. "Do you understand your duty, Daniel?" I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I understood. The lighthouse didn't ask for obedience. It demanded it. Sleep became a memory. Each night, the lighthouse grew more alive, more patient, more deliberate. I would ascend the stairs to check the lantern, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse with expectation. The wind carried voices from the cliffs, keepers who had come before, warning me, pleading, laughing. Each voice folded into the next until I could no longer distinguish one from another. One evening, Clara brought a candle and an old journal. "This belonged to your predecessor," she said, her hands trembling. "Read carefully. He failed, and the tower didn't forgive him." The journal's pages described how the lighthouse could see inside a keeper's mind, extracting guilt, memories, even intentions. It stored them in the light itself, feeding off unresolved fears until the keeper either surrendered completely or disappeared. At 1:13 a.m., the knocking began again, so loud it shook the walls. The lantern's flame danced without wind, shadows stretching like claws across the room. A voice echoed clearly, deep and layered. "Daniel, keep the light burning, or you will join them." I realized then the truth. The lighthouse had never been about guiding ships. It was about testing the souls of those who dared to guard it. And my turn had only just begun. The next few nights blurred together. Each evening, I ascended the spiral stairs with dread in my chest, every step echoing like a heartbeat. The lighthouse seemed to anticipate my movements, the walls whispering my thoughts before I could even think them aloud. At 1:13 a.m., the knocking became frantic. The voice, now louder, layered with dozens of others, commanded, "Show your guilt. Prove your worth." I realized then that the lighthouse didn't just observe. It judged. It sifted through every memory, every failure, every hidden shame I carried. And it wanted me to confront them, relive them, until I could no longer resist. That night, I saw shadows move in the lantern's light, almost human but too distorted to be real. They were the keepers who came before me, trapped in the tower, their eyes pleading, their mouths silent. I felt their presence pressing against my mind, reminding me of choices I had buried long ago, moments I'd ignored, people I'd abandoned, chances I'd wasted. I wept quietly, unable to stop the memories. The tower seemed to lean closer, as if savoring each regret. And in that moment, I understood the unspoken rule of Point Ember. The lighthouse does not forgive. It only collects. The following night, Clara returned with an old oil lamp, insisting I keep it burning alongside the main lantern. "It stabilizes the light," she explained. "Keeps the voices at bay, temporarily." I stayed awake all night, alternating between the lantern and oil lamp. But at 1:13 a.m., the tower erupted with sound. Knocking, scratching, and whispers layering into a deafening chorus. The walls vibrated under my hands. The shadows appeared first in the corners of my eyes. Then they moved closer, climbing the stairs with an unnatural agility. Faces, pale and twisted, pressed themselves against the stone like they wanted to peer inside me. The voice spoke again, clear and commanding. "Fail, and join them." I realized then the terrible truth. The lighthouse didn't just judge your guilt, it absorbed you. Each keeper who faltered became part of the light, part of the walls, feeding the tower for decades, preserved in its lantern so that it could warn or punish the next. I felt an icy tendril brush my shoulder, like a hand pulling me toward the flame. My life, my memories, everything I was, hovered on the edge of the lantern's glow. And I had a choice. To survive, I had to obey. The nights became a battlefield. I clutched the lantern, the oil lamp beside it, and prayed the light would hold. The knocking no longer came from the railing. It came from inside the walls, inside my bones, and even from the ocean below. At 1:13 a.m., I saw it. A figure emerging from the lantern itself, a twisted, translucent man with hollow eyes, skin rippling like water. He raised a hand as if to welcome me. I realized, with horror, that this was a keeper who had failed. One of many. I backed away, but the tower seemed to bend toward me. The spiral stairs stretched impossibly, steps appearing where none should exist. The walls hummed with hundreds of voices, echoing my fears, repeating every mistake I had ever made. Clara's words returned to me. It stores your guilt in the light itself. I had a choice. I could submit fully, pour every secret into the lantern, and survive another night. Or resist and join the endless chorus trapped in the walls. The figure reached toward me. I felt a cold hand graze my cheek. The lighthouse didn't just collect, it consumed. And tonight, it wanted everything. I tried to write my confessions into the notebook Clara had given me, but the pages were blank. The lantern itself seemed to drink my words before I could form them. Every memory, every fear, every regret was now tethered to the light. At 1:13 a.m., the tower's hum became deafening. Shadows twisted, forming hundreds of faces I had never seen. Some were screaming, some were calm. All were waiting. The translucent keeper from the lantern spoke with hundreds of voices simultaneously. You cannot leave. You cannot hide. You belong to the light. My knees buckled. The spiral staircase beneath me stretched endlessly. The wind howled through the windows, carrying the scent of salt, decay, and centuries of collected guilt. I realized the lighthouse was not a building, not a tool. It was eternal, a living archive of human failure, storing every thought, every shame, and every soul foolish enough to guard it. Clara's voice echoed faintly. It chooses who to save and who to consume. I had survived 6 nights, but by dawn, I understood the truth. Survival was temporary. Obedience was eternal. The light was patient, and it had marked me as its next story. By the 9th night, I had learned that the lighthouse didn't simply punish. It tested you, shaping fear into form and measuring whether you would break. Every creak in the spiral staircase, every flicker of the lantern, every whisper from the fog outside was part of its trial. At 1:13 a.m., the lantern flared, bathing the tower in harsh, white light. Shadows danced violently along the walls, forming grotesque versions of my face. Hundreds of eyes stared back at me, accusing, pleading, empty. The translucent keeper from the lantern appeared again, closer this time. Your secrets, your regrets. Hand them over, it whispered in 1,000 overlapping voices. Or join us forever. I realized I had no choice. Every thought I had tried to bury was alive in the light, and it would consume me if I resisted. I raised my hands and spoke aloud everything I feared admitting, my failures, my lies, my cowardice. Each word felt like it was being absorbed into the lantern. The shadows paused, listening. The air grew still. For the first time, I felt relief. but I knew it was temporary. The lighthouse would never forgive. It would only ever wait, and I would have to return. The 10th night was silence. Until 1:13 a.m. The tower was empty. No shadows, no knocking, no voices. Only the lantern, glowing steadily, almost benign. I thought I had survived. Then the wind shifted, carrying hundreds of whispered confessions from previous keepers, layered into one unbearable chant. The lantern flared violently, and I felt hands, cold, spectral, grasping my shoulders. "You are ours," the voice intoned, now clearly the combination of every keeper before me. "Every thought, every fear, every sin is stored here. You belong to the light now." I understood. Survival was not freedom. Obedience was not safety. I was now part of the lighthouse's memory, a keeper in spirit, even if flesh remained. Clara's words echoed, haunting me forever. It keeps the light burning, and the light keeps the keepers. There is no leaving. Even now, decades later, I can feel the tower in my chest. My thoughts, my fears, my failures, all reflected in the lantern's eternal flame. If you ever visit Point Ember, watch the lighthouse at night. And listen, because it might already be watching you. My name is Daniel Harper, and I never left. My name is Lydia Monroe, and this happened during a solo winter trip to the remote forests of northern Quebec. I thought a week in isolation would clear my mind, a retreat from city chaos. I didn't expect it to become a fight for my sanity. The cabin I rented was deep in the woods, miles from the nearest road. Snow blanketed everything in a silence so thick it pressed on my chest. At first, the quiet was comforting. The wind brushing against the cabin walls, the creaking of old timbers, and the soft crunch of snow under my boots felt like solitude. The first night, I settled in with a fire blazing. Outside, the wind died suddenly, replaced by a heavier, unnatural stillness. At 12:47 a.m., I heard it, scratching, deliberate and slow, coming from the back wall of the cabin. I froze, listening. The sound stopped as soon as I moved. I told myself it was a branch, frost shifting, or my imagination. Then the whispers began. Low, icy voices murmuring my name through the thin walls. Lydia. They weren't human. They didn't belong to the wind. They belonged to the forest itself. The next morning, I tried to shake it off, convincing myself the forest was harmless. I collected firewood and explored the perimeter. Footprints in the snow surrounded the cabin, but none were mine. They circled the building, fading into the white distance. By evening, the whispers returned, more insistent. My name, repeated over and over, layered with words I didn't understand. My fingers trembled as I tried to start the fire, and the logs refused to catch. At 12:47 a.m., a shadow passed across the frosted window. I froze. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure it would give me away. Then came the scratching again, slow and deliberate, moving along the walls, closer and closer to my bedroom. I wanted to leave, but the snowstorm had begun. Visibility dropped to nothing. My phone had no signal. The cabin felt smaller, the walls pressing in as if the forest wanted me inside. That night, I realized the truth. I was not alone. The forest didn't just surround the cabin, it had entered it, and it was waiting. By the third night, the forest's presence was undeniable. The whispers had grown louder, forming words I could almost understand. My name, repeated endlessly, mixed with desperate cries and strange commands. I tried recording them, thinking proof would help me rationalize the experience. The playback was worse, my own voice responding to voices I had never spoken to. At 12:47 a.m., the scratching returned. This time, it moved along the floorboards, circling the cabin as though something invisible stalked me. I grabbed a kitchen knife and followed the sound. But every corner I turned was empty. Still, the pressure in the air was suffocating, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I remembered the journal I'd found in the cabin's drawer, left by the previous renter. It described strange occurrences in the forest for decades. Missing hikers, cabins abandoned mid-storm, unexplained frostbite, and voices that called out from nowhere. The final entry was smudged, with a single sentence legible: "The forest does not forgive solitude." Suddenly, the cabin door slammed shut, freezing my blood. The whispers now became a chorus, louder than the storm outside. I realized I could no longer distinguish between reality and what the forest was shaping in my mind. I was trapped, alone, yet surrounded by something ancient. The storm raged through the night, but inside, the air was unnaturally still. The whispers became clearer. Not just my name, but sentences forming threats and commands. The walls themselves seemed to breathe. At 12:47 a.m., frost crept across the cabin floor, forming patterns that resembled footprints. But they weren't human. They circled me, moved in spirals, as if the forest were mapping me. I lit every candle I could find, tried to create a circle of light around myself. But the shadows stretched and twisted anyway, reaching toward me despite the flames. The journal had warned me. The forest responds to fear, feeds on hesitation, and grows stronger when it senses desperation. I clenched the knife, trying to convince myself it was enough. Then I heard it clearly, above the wind. A voice, old and knowing, like the forest itself spoke, deep and resonant. "You should not have come here, Lydia. You do not belong." The cabin door shook violently, rattling the walls. My heart pounded, my breath came in ragged gasps, and I realized escaping would not be enough. The forest was already inside, and it had no intention of letting me leave. By the fifth night, I understood the forest was no longer outside. It was inside me. Every movement, every thought, every heartbeat seemed to echo through the cabin, amplified and twisted. My own reflection in the frost on the windows looked wrong. Eyes darker, shadows moving beneath my skin. At 12:47 a.m., the whispers became commands. They told me to stand in certain corners, to repeat phrases I didn't recognize, to write symbols in the frost. I tried ignoring them, but the cold intensified, biting through every layer of clothing. My teeth chattered uncontrollably as I realized that the temperature was no longer natural. I ran to the door to escape, only to find snow piled impossibly high, forming walls that weren't there before. The forest had rearranged itself. The path I had walked earlier was gone, replaced by an endless white void that stretched beyond sight. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, calm and terrifying. "You are ours now." I tried to scream, but the sound froze in my throat. Every instinct to survive was paralyzed. The cabin itself seemed to lean toward me, pressing closer. I was trapped, alone, and the forest was patient. The sixth night, exhaustion made my thoughts sluggish. My mind became a labyrinth the forest could navigate. Every creak, every gust of wind, every whisper reminded me that I was not in control. At 12:47 a.m., the scratching returned, this time on the floorboards of the bedroom. Each tap was deliberate, almost like a heartbeat synchronized with mine. I followed the sound to the corner where frost had formed unnatural shapes. The patterns resembled human figures, twisted and distorted, pressed into the frozen floor. The whispers now spoke in unison, a choir of cold voices. Kneel. Submit. Belong. I felt an icy tendril wrap around my ankle, dragging me toward the corner. Panic surged, and I tried to resist, but the frost was sticky, impossible to lift my foot. Then the candlelight flickered, and the shadows on the wall grew taller, stretching toward the ceiling, reaching for me. I realized the truth. This forest didn't just trap bodies. It trapped minds, twisting perception until reality was whatever it wanted me to see. And tonight, it was showing me my future. I was already part of the cabin, part of the frost, part of the forest. The seventh night, I stopped resisting. It was useless. The forest had already claimed my mind, my senses, my very presence. The cabin felt alive, the walls breathing slowly, rhythmically, as though it knew my fear and savored it. At 12:47 a.m., the scratching turned into footsteps, circling me from every corner. I could hear the crunch of snow through the floorboards, though the cabin was sealed tight. Whispers swirled around me, forming sentences I could understand. You came alone. You belong alone. You will never leave. I ran to the window, desperate to escape. But the forest outside had transformed. Trees twisted unnaturally, their branches like skeletal hands reaching into the cabin. Snow swirled in impossible patterns, forming faces that screamed silently at me. Then I saw them. Shadows at the corners of the room. Faint at first, then solidifying into humanoid shapes. They weren't fully human, but not entirely forest either. They had eyes that glowed faintly in the dim candlelight, staring directly at me. I realized the forest didn't just trap its victims. It made them part of itself. And tonight, it was testing me to see if I was ready to join. The eighth night, I stopped pretending the cabin was just a building. The walls themselves were alive, the frost a medium through which the forest communicated. I could hear hundreds of tiny footsteps pacing around me, feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing into my skull. At 12:47 a.m., the shadows solidified further. Faces, twisted with anger and sorrow, emerged from the frost on the floor, crawling toward me. The whispers became a chant. Submit. Become. Belong. I realized I could no longer distinguish myself from the cabin, from the forest, from the frost. My memories, my fears, my identity. They were all merging with the malevolent presence around me. In desperation, I grabbed a blanket and tried to cover myself, to insulate against the invasion. But the cold seeped through it, icy tendrils wrapping around my body. Every scream, every attempt at resistance only made the frost tighten. The forest didn't need to touch me physically. It could reach inside, twist my perception, and make me bend to its will. By dawn, exhaustion left me gasping, half frozen and utterly aware. Escape was impossible. The forest had already claimed me, and tomorrow it would demand more. The ninth night, I understood that the forest's patience was endless. Every sound, every flicker of light, every breath I took was observed and measured. The whispers were no longer subtle. They enveloped me completely, filling my mind with impossible images. Trees bending over me, frost-covered hands reaching from walls, and faces twisted in agony, silently screaming. At 12:47 a.m., the frost shifted beneath my feet, forming words, join us, belong, never leave. I tried to step back, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Panic surged. The shadows around me stretched into towering shapes, humanoid but impossibly elongated, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim candlelight. The forest's voice, ancient and omnipotent, spoke through the whispers. You cannot leave. You are ours. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the snowstorm outside had obliterated every path. Even the cabin itself felt like a trap, the walls bending subtly, as if mocking my attempts to escape. I realized the final choice wasn't physical. It was mental. I could resist and be consumed entirely, or surrender and become part of the forest's endless chorus of trapped souls. My body trembled, my mind screamed. But the forest waited patiently, as it always had. The 10th night, surrender became inevitable. At 12:47 a.m., the frost on the floor swirled like water, forming a pool of frozen figures, keepers of the forest who had come before me. They rose slowly, their eyes hollow but full of intent, reaching toward me. I realized then that the forest's power was absolute. It didn't just trap bodies. It trapped memories, fears, and identities, preserving them in the frost and the trees, feeding endlessly on each victim's terror. I dropped to my knees, feeling icy tendrils wrap around my limbs, climbing higher with every second. The shadows pressed closer, the whispering now a deafening chorus. You belong here. Forever. I closed my eyes, accepting it. My thoughts, my fears, my very soul were absorbed into the forest. I felt the icy frost seep into my skin, into my mind, becoming one with the cabin, one with the snow, one with the trees that waited silently outside. When morning came, the storm had stopped. The cabin appeared peaceful, innocent. Yet inside, the forest had claimed another voice, another soul added to its eternal collection. If you ever wander deep into northern Quebec's forests and find a lone cabin, listen carefully, because it might already know your name. My name was Lydia Monroe, and I never left. My name is Ethan Clark, and this happened on a late autumn trip through the remote highways of northern Ontario. I was driving alone, enjoying the silence, when I first noticed something strange. The road signs had grown sparse, and the trees along the highway seemed unnaturally dense, closing in like a living wall. At first, I thought it was exhaustion, the monotony of the dark highway playing tricks on my mind. But then the headlights caught movement in the trees, brief, almost imperceptible, like figures standing just beyond sight. They disappeared whenever I tried to focus on them. The GPS had stopped working hours ago. My phone had no signal. Only the headlights and the hum of the engine kept me tethered to reality. At 2:03 a.m., I saw it. A shadow crossing the road ahead. I swerved instinctively, but when I looked back, there was nothing. No tracks, no footprints, just the dark highway stretching endlessly in both directions. Something about the silence felt alive, almost sentient. I pressed the accelerator, hoping to reach the next town. But the road seemed to stretch, curving unnaturally, and the shadows in the trees deepened. I wasn't lost. I was being led. By the second hour, the highway no longer made sense. Mile markers were missing. Every curve looked identical, as if the road had no end. The shadows seemed to stretch toward the car, moving just outside the reach of the headlights. At 2:03 a.m., the radio crackled to life, though it had been dead. A distorted voice whispered my name. Ethan, stop, turn back. I spun the dial, but the voice persisted, layered over static, almost like hundreds of voices speaking at once. The trees outside seemed to shift, branches leaning toward the car as I sped past. I could see glimpses of figures standing along the roadside, tall, thin, unnervingly still. But whenever I blinked, they vanished. A sudden patch of fog enveloped the car, reducing visibility to a few feet. My heart raced. The road ahead seemed to ripple as though it weren't solid. Something about this place felt ancient, waiting, patient. The shadows were no longer hiding. They were guiding me, and whatever waited at the end of this road knew my name. By the third hour, panic had settled in. My eyes strained to see anything beyond the dim reach of the headlights. The trees now pressed closer, their branches clawing at the edges of the road, scraping the car with dry, brittle fingers. The shadows were no longer distant. They moved fluidly, almost gliding alongside me, matching the speed of the car. At 2:03 a.m., the radio blared a distorted recording of my own voice. I could hear my heartbeat, my breathing, even my terrified words from earlier echoed back to me. The sensation was suffocating, as if the forest and road had somehow merged with my mind. Suddenly, a figure appeared directly in front of me. A tall, shadowy man with no discernible features, standing perfectly still in the middle of the highway. I swerved violently, tires crunching over unseen debris. But when I looked back, the road ahead was empty. The figure had vanished without leaving a trace. I realized I was no longer driving through space, but through time itself. The curves repeated, the markers recycled, and the shadows followed relentlessly. Every instinct screamed to stop, to abandon the road, but the whispers in the fog insisted, "Do not leave. You belong here." The highway had become a trap, alive, and it was aware of me. By the fourth hour, exhaustion blurred reality. My vision tunneled, the road repeating endlessly, yet the shadows grew bolder. They no longer stayed in the trees. They appeared in fleeting glimpses inside the car, reflected in mirrors, sometimes behind the windshield, always watching. At 2:03 a.m., the fog thickened to the point that visibility was almost zero. The radio now whispered a command: "Stop, or join us." Every mile felt longer than the last. The road bent in impossible ways, the forest walls closing in with unnatural precision. Branches scratched against the hood and roof, leaving marks that seemed to burn like ice against my skin. I caught glimpses of other cars, abandoned, their doors open, engines cold, shadows crawling inside. Were they previous victims, claimed by the vanishing road? My stomach churned with fear and nausea. Then, a figure appeared at the roadside, waving frantically. I slowed instinctively, thinking it might be someone lost like me. But as I approached, it twisted impossibly, its face hollow, eyes black voids, and it vanished as my headlights passed. It was no accident. The road was alive, and it had been waiting for me. By the fifth hour, exhaustion and terror had fused. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. Every mile felt longer than the last, every shadow seemed to stretch closer, and every turn of the road brought me back to the same point I thought I had passed hours ago. At 2:03 a.m., I saw a flicker of movement ahead. A figure stood in the middle of the lane, tall, thin, and featureless, its limbs elongated unnaturally. I swerved sharply to avoid it, tires sliding on icy patches of asphalt that weren't there before. When I regained control, the figure had vanished. No footprints, no signs it had existed at all. The radio crackled with a voice I didn't recognize, overlapping with my own terrified breaths. "You cannot leave. You belong to the road." Every instinct screamed to stop, to abandon the car. But my mind told me that stopping might be worse. The shadows outside were no longer stationary. They mirrored my movements, darting from tree to tree, crossing over the road, and then vanishing in the fog. I realized then the truth. This road was a predator, It didn't just trap cars or people. It consumed their fear, their sanity, and perhaps their very souls. And it was patient. By the 6th hour, the road had begun to distort reality itself. Curves repeated endlessly, the trees leaned impossibly, and the fog thickened so much that headlights illuminated nothing beyond a few feet. My sense of time collapsed. I had no idea how long I'd been trapped. At 2:03 a.m., the shadows appeared closer than ever. Figures emerged not just along the roadside, but inside the car itself, reflected in mirrors, crouching in the back seat, watching silently. I tried to shake my head, convincing myself it was hallucination, exhaustion, or sleep deprivation. But the cold, almost icy presence brushing against my skin said otherwise. The radio erupted in static. Then a voice whispered directly into my mind, "Join us. Become part of the road." Panic overtook me. I pressed the accelerator, hoping speed would break the cycle. But the road seemed endless. Each mile, each turn, led me back to the same cursed stretch where the first figure appeared. I realized that no matter what I did, the road had already chosen me. It didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to belong. And I could feel it waiting, patient, sentient, and hungry. By the 7th hour, exhaustion and terror had fused into something paralyzing. The fog thickened into a wall, swallowing the headlights' glow and turning the highway into a river of gray. Shadows no longer lingered in the trees. They ran alongside the car, moving in perfect synchronization, too fast to be human. At 2:03 a.m., I saw them. Dozens of figures emerging from the fog. They were tall, thin, and featureless, with limbs that bent impossibly, stretching toward me. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it over the engine. I swerved sharply, trying to escape, but the road twisted back upon itself. The same curves repeating, the same trees looming closer. The radio erupted in whispers, hundreds of voices speaking at once. "You cannot leave. You belong to the road, forever." A shadow darted across the windshield, closer this time, its faceless head tilting as though studying me. The car trembled, tires slipping on asphalt that seemed to vanish beneath them. I understood the terrifying truth. The road wasn't just a trap. It was alive. It didn't just consume the body. It claimed the mind, bending reality to its will, absorbing fear and feeding on it endlessly. And tonight, it had chosen me as its next prey. By the 8th hour, my mind was fraying. Every mile I drove felt like I was moving through a nightmare loop. The shadows no longer hid in the fog. They were everywhere, flickering in the corners of my vision, mirrored in every reflection, whispering constantly in my mind. At 2:03 a.m., I passed a broken signpost. It displayed my name, burned into the wood in letters that weren't there moments before. Panic surged through me. The fog thickened to the point that I could barely see the hood of my car, and the shadows merged into a single massive form, stretching across the road, limbs twisting like branches. The whispers became a chant, slow and deliberate. "Join us. Belong. Forever." I tried to accelerate, but the asphalt beneath me rippled like water. The trees leaned closer, the branches scraping against the car, leaving deep marks as if warning me that escape was impossible. The road was alive. It was patient. It was endless. And it had already decided my fate. I realized, with a sickening clarity, that no human had ever truly left this place. The vanishing road didn't just claim travelers. It swallowed them whole. By the 9th hour, I was no longer certain I was human, or that my mind belonged to me. The road had become a predator, patient and cunning, feeding on my fear. Every shadow was alive, stretching, bending and whispering, voices merging into a deafening chorus that pressed against my skull. At 2:03 a.m., a figure appeared directly in front of the car. This one was taller than the others, its faceless head tilting slowly as if studying me. My eyes locked on it, and for a moment, time slowed. The road beneath me rippled, twisting impossibly, while the fog thickened to a wall of gray, swallowing the headlights entirely. The radio burst into static, then a whisper, clear as day. "You cannot leave. You belong to the road. Forever." Every instinct screamed to stop, to abandon the car. But the forest outside was no longer there. The road had consumed everything, leaving only gray fog and shadows. I understood then the final truth. The vanishing road didn't just trap travelers physically, it trapped their minds, folding their consciousness into its endless loop. And tonight, it had me. The 10th hour, and there was no hope left. At 2:03 a.m., the shadows fully merged into one colossal form, filling the entire road, pulsating like a living entity. The fog roared as if the road itself had inhaled, and the whispering chorus became a deafening scream. I tried to flee, pressing the accelerator, but the car no longer responded. Tires spun, engines strained, and the asphalt seemed to ripple beneath me, bending impossibly. The shadow reached out with limbs of darkness, wrapping around the car, the fog, the very air I breathed. I realized then, I was already gone. My consciousness, my fear, my identity, they were part of the road now, another soul trapped in its endless loop. The figures from earlier, the abandoned cars, the whispered warnings, they were all me, all Ethan, all lost to this supernatural highway. When dawn came, the road appeared normal again, stretching endlessly with no sign of the horrors within. Travelers might pass it and never know the truth. But if you ever see a foggy highway in northern Ontario at night, listen closely. You might hear whispers, and it might already know your name. My name is Ethan Clark, and I never left. My name is Claire Donovan, and this happened during my summer internship at a remote lighthouse on the rugged coast of Newfoundland. I'd been hired to assist the aging lighthouse keeper, a solitary man named Thomas, and I was told the isolation was part of the job. Perfect for someone who wanted quiet. The first few days were serene. The waves crashed against the cliffs, gulls circled the sky, and the lighthouse's beams swept methodically across the black ocean. But soon, I noticed strange occurrences. At night, faint footsteps echoed across the spiral staircase, even when I was alone. Doors that I had locked were slightly ajar in the morning, and shadows seemed to move just outside the windows. On the third night, the storm arrived. It was unlike any I had seen. Wind howling so violently, it shook the lighthouse, waves crashing higher than the cliffs themselves. I huddled in the keeper's quarters, listening, when I heard a low guttural whisper. "Claire, you shouldn't be here." I froze, my heart hammering. The voice was unmistakable, yet Thomas was asleep in the next room. I tried to rationalize it, wind, the storm, but deep down, I knew something on this isolated cliff was watching me. By that moment, the lighthouse no longer felt like a safe haven. It felt like a trap. By the second night, the isolation was suffocating. The storm had left a thick fog that blanketed the cliffs and ocean, muting sound and light. Every creak of the old lighthouse felt amplified, as though the building itself were alive. I tried to sleep, but the whispers continued, soft, taunting, seeming to come from the walls themselves. At 1:13 a.m., I heard Thomas muttering to himself, though I knew he was asleep. His voice, low and strange, seemed to respond to something invisible. Not yet. She's not ready. I froze, heart racing, realizing he hadn't been awake at all. The footsteps on the spiral staircase grew heavier, deliberate, echoing around the circular walls. I grabbed a flashlight, shaking, and moved toward the top of the lighthouse, trying to see what or who was there. Through the fogged windows, I saw a figure standing on the cliff edge. It was tall, hunched, its face hidden beneath a hooded coat, unmoving despite the storm. Its presence was unnerving, unnatural, like it belonged neither to the land nor the sea. And then I realized the whispers weren't coming from inside the lighthouse. They were coming from the cliffs, and they were calling my name. By the third night, fear had rooted itself in every corner of the lighthouse. The fog hung thick outside, but inside, shadows moved independently of the lanterns. I began to hear whispers not just at night, but during the day. Soft, persistent, calling my name in tones that were both urgent and mocking. At 1:13 a.m., I climbed the spiral staircase, drawn by a strange compulsion. The air grew colder with each step, and frost began to form on the metal railing, though the temperature inside had been steady all day. My flashlight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. Then I saw it. A figure standing at the top of the staircase, slightly translucent. Its face featureless, its posture unnaturally rigid. It seemed to watch me, studying me. My throat tightened, but I couldn't speak or move. Suddenly, the lighthouse bell rang, though no one had touched it. Each toll resonated through the walls, shaking the structure and my very bones. The figure remained, unwavering, and the whispers grew louder, almost chanting. She is ours. She belongs. I realized then that the lighthouse itself was a vessel, a magnet for something older, something patient, something hungry for souls like mine. The storm outside felt insignificant compared to the storm inside the building. By the fourth night, the presence had grown bold. The whispers no longer merely spoke, they commanded. Every door I closed reopened. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally toward me, and the air itself felt heavy, thick with intent. At 1:13 a.m., I found Thomas in the main chamber, kneeling with his head bowed, murmuring the same strange words as the whispers had spoken. His hands were shaking, but he didn't notice me. The sight made my stomach churn with dread. I turned toward the lantern room, where the fog outside shimmered unnaturally, as though alive. A figure moved along the cliff's edge, a tall, hunched silhouette, unmoving yet somehow following every motion I made. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The lighthouse itself groaned and shuddered. The beams spun erratically, illuminating jagged cliffs, violent waves, and the figure, which now seemed to bend, twist, and grow taller with every rotation of the light. I realized with terror that the lighthouse didn't just guard ships. It was a beacon for something else. Something that fed on isolation, fear, and those foolish enough to wander into its beam. And tonight, it had chosen me. By the fifth night, I knew the lighthouse had become a predator. Every shadow, every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lamp seemed deliberate, as if the building itself was aware of my presence and feeding off my fear. The fog outside pressed against the windows like cold hands, and the ocean's roar was deafening, echoing my racing heartbeat. At 1:13 a.m., I climbed the spiral staircase toward the lantern room, hoping to confront whatever haunted this place. The metal steps shivered under my weight, though the temperature had remained constant. Shadows danced across the walls, stretching impossibly long, reaching toward me with claw-like fingers. When I reached the top, I saw it. A tall, hunched figure standing outside on the cliff, its shape flickering in and out of existence. Its face was hidden, featureless, yet I felt it staring directly into my soul. I wanted to run, but the staircase behind me had disappeared into darkness. The lighthouse was no longer just a building. It was a trap, a corridor into something older, darker, and malevolent. And then the whispers returned, louder, surrounding me from all directions. You cannot leave. You belong to the light, forever. I realized my only option was to confront it. By the sixth night, desperation had replaced fear. I knew the lighthouse was alive in ways no human could understand. The floorboards groaned, the walls breathed, and the beam of light became erratic, as if guiding something or someone toward me. At 1:13 a.m., I found myself in the lantern room, heart hammering. The fog outside shimmered unnaturally, and the waves seemed to rise higher, crashing against the cliffs like the ocean itself was alive. The figure from before moved closer, crawling along the edge of the cliff with inhuman speed, then vanished as suddenly as it appeared. The whispers grew into a roar, chanting my name and the words Thomas had murmured. She is ours. She belongs forever. I tried to open the windows, to escape onto the cliff. But an invisible force pushed back as if the lighthouse itself had locked me in. My mind screamed in panic, but my body was frozen in place. It became clear. The lighthouse didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to become part of it, to feed the storm, to be another whisper in its endless, malevolent chorus. And I could feel it reaching for me. By the seventh night, terror had become a constant pulse in my veins. The fog outside had thickened into an almost solid wall, muting the crashing waves and the wind. But inside, the lighthouse seemed alive, quivering with intent. Shadows stretched across the walls like elongated fingers, twisting and writhing as if testing my courage. At 1:13 a.m., I climbed the spiral staircase once more, driven by an instinct I couldn't understand. Each step echoed unnaturally, magnified into a chorus of creaks that seemed to come from every direction at once. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, chanting my name along with words I didn't recognize, words older than the lighthouse itself. In the lantern room, the beam of light now moved on its own, sweeping the cliffs and ocean erratically. The figure on the cliff reappeared, hunched and featureless, its presence bending reality around it. It raised an arm, or what I thought was an arm, and the shadows inside the lighthouse seemed to reach toward me, pressing closer with every heartbeat. I realized then that the lighthouse didn't just trap bodies. It trapped minds, twisting them, warping them, feeding on their terror. And I was next in line. I had to survive. But I didn't know if that was possible. By the eighth night, I had begun to understand the lighthouse's true nature. It was not simply a building. It was a beacon for something ancient, something that fed on isolation and fear. The fog outside glimmered unnaturally, and the ocean no longer seemed to crash. It seemed to pulse, synchronized with the lighthouse's whispers. At 1:13 a.m., Thomas appeared suddenly in the lantern room, his eyes wide and vacant. He whispered the same words I had heard from the shadows over and over. She belongs. The light takes all. The featureless figure on the cliff now moved closer, its form stretching and twisting as if it were not bound by the laws of physics. The lighthouse trembled, the walls groaning as though it were breathing. The beam of light scanned the fog, illuminating not just the cliffs, but shapes moving in impossible angles. Faces, twisted hands, glimpses of other lost souls trapped in the lighthouse's power. I realized there was no escape. The lighthouse wanted me to join its chorus, to become another whisper in the fog, another shadow in the spiral staircase. And as the beam swept over me, I knew the ancient presence had already reached for my mind, testing the limits of my sanity. By the 9th night, I was consumed by dread. The lighthouse groaned with life, its metal and stone vibrating under an unseen force. Shadows moved with a purpose now, crawling along the walls, the floor, and even the ceiling, encroaching on every inch of space. My heart raced, each beat echoing through the spiral staircase like a drum of warning. At 1:13 a.m., the figure on the cliff became larger, towering impossibly, its faceless head tilted toward me. The fog swirled violently, almost alive, forming tendrils that reached toward the lighthouse, as if beckoning me into the void. The whispers were now deafening, overlapping in a chorus of voices older than the building itself, chanting my name. "Claire, join us. The light takes all." Thomas fell to his knees, muttering incoherently, eyes rolling back, unseeing. I knew then that he had been claimed long ago, and I was next. My mind screamed for escape, but the lighthouse itself seemed to have absorbed my will. Every instinct told me to run, but I was frozen, paralyzed by the presence that now filled the room, pressing in from all sides. I realized with bone-deep horror that the lighthouse didn't just take the living. It devoured their sanity first. The 10th night, and the lighthouse reached its full power. At 1:13 a.m., the lantern room was alive with shadows twisting, merging, and clawing at reality itself. The featureless figure on the cliff stretched impossibly, towering over the fog, arms extending into shapes that defied human form. The whispers had become a roar, filling my mind with their ancient cadence, commanding, relentless, "She belongs. She belongs. She belongs." I tried to scream, to move, but my body refused. The floor beneath me felt liquid, bending and twisting like the lighthouse itself was swallowing me. The fog outside glowed faintly, casting spectral light through the windows, revealing shapes of countless lost souls, all frozen in the lighthouse's grasp. Then, everything went still. The shadows froze, the fog stilled, and the beam of light shone calmly across the ocean, as if nothing had occurred. Thomas slumped silently, and I realized I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. My mind felt heavy, almost foreign, as though a piece of me had already been claimed by the lighthouse. I never left the lighthouse that summer. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in along the cliffs of Newfoundland, I can hear the whispers again, calling my name. The light never forgets. My name is Derek Mills, and this happened during a summer excavation project in a small, abandoned mining town in British Columbia. I had been hired to survey the old silver mine for historical preservation, but I was warned locals avoided the site after sunset. I didn't believe them until that first night. The mine entrance was a gaping maw of darkness, framed by crumbling wood supports and rusted rails. As I descended, the air grew colder, damp, and musty, carrying the faint metallic tang of rust and decay. My flashlight cut a narrow beam through the darkness, revealing jagged walls, piles of abandoned tools, and collapsed shafts. Each step echoed, swallowed instantly by the cavernous tunnels. By 11:47 p.m., I heard it. A faint scraping sound, distant but deliberate, like claws on rock. I froze, straining my ears, telling myself it was just loose rocks or wildlife. But then a whisper echoed through the tunnel. "Derek, you shouldn't be here." I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. But there was nothing, just darkness stretching endlessly, swallowing the light. My gut clenched with the realization that this mine had not been abandoned entirely. Something, or someone, still lingered in its shadows, and it had been waiting for me. That's when I knew the stories were true. This mine was cursed. By the second hour, the mine's oppressive darkness had begun to weigh on me. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, and the walls seemed to close in, swallowing the light from my flashlight. My breathing was loud in the narrow tunnel, every inhale feeling like it might betray me to something unseen. At 11:47 p.m., I heard it again, the faint scratching, followed by a whisper that seemed impossibly close. "You cannot leave. You belong to us." I turned sharply, my flashlight beam cutting through the tunnel, revealing nothing but broken timbers and piles of rock. But then I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Shadows that didn't align with the walls or my light, flickering, creeping toward me. Panic surged, and I began to retrace my steps. But the tunnels twisted in ways that didn't match my memory, almost as if the mine itself were alive and shifting. Every instinct screamed to escape, but something compelled me forward, deeper into the mine, toward the source of the whispers. With each step, I could feel a presence just beyond the beam of light, watching, patient, waiting. The air grew colder, wetter, and heavier. And I realized then that the mine didn't just hold shadows. It held secrets far older and far darker than I had imagined. By the third hour, the mine felt alive. Every sound, the drip of water, the scrape of rock, the echo of my own heartbeat, resonated like it had a purpose. Shadows shifted unnaturally along the walls, stretching impossibly, flickering in the corners of my vision. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion or tricks of the light, but the cold air clinging to my skin told me otherwise. At 11:47 p.m., I reached a collapsed shaft and paused. That's when I heard it clearly. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from deeper in the mine. Not mine. Something else was walking. My flashlight flickered violently, revealing a glimpse of a figure crouched in the shadows. It was humanoid, but elongated, limbs bending at unnatural angles, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and realized the mine was not just a hollow shell of history. It was a trap, a cage for those who dared to enter. The whispering returned, soft and insidious. "You cannot leave. The mine takes all who wander." My body shook as I pressed onward, drawn forward despite the terror, compelled by an unseen force guiding me deeper into the labyrinth. The mine had already chosen me. By the fourth hour, panic and exhaustion merged into pure dread. Every twist of the tunnel seemed unfamiliar, despite having mapped it earlier. The mine had become a maze, alive and changing, swallowing my sense of direction. The air grew damp and heavy, carrying the faint metallic stench of blood long decayed. At 11:47 p.m., I saw a movement ahead. A tall, thin figure emerging from a side shaft, partially obscured by shadow. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, and it tilted its featureless head as though assessing me. I tried to retreat, but the tunnel behind me had vanished, replaced by jagged rock walls. The whispers intensified, now joined by a low, guttural growl that resonated through the mine itself. "You belong to us. You belong." My flashlight flickered and died. Darkness swallowed me instantly, and I could feel the walls closing in, tendrils of shadow wrapping around my ankles, creeping up my legs, freezing my movements. My mind screamed for escape, but the mine's presence had begun to press on my sanity itself. I realized, with chilling clarity, that this was no ordinary mine. It was a predator, patient, eternal and merciless, and I was its prey. By the 5th hour, terror had taken full control of my senses. The mind was no longer just a physical space. It was a living entity, responding to my fear. Each step I took echoed with a dozen phantom footfalls behind me, whispers now chanting in unison, calling my name with an urgency that pierced my mind. My flashlight flickered desperately, barely illuminating the jagged walls, revealing twisted shadows that moved independently, crawling along rocks like living tendrils. At 11:47 p.m., I stumbled into a collapsed shaft that I hadn't noticed before. From the darkness emerged a mass of writhing shapes, indistinct yet humanoid, their elongated limbs twisting in ways that defied anatomy. The whispers became words I could barely comprehend. "We claim, all who enter, you belong." My pulse raced, my breath quickened, but an unseen force pushed me deeper into the mine, toward a narrower, more twisted tunnel. The walls seemed to pulse as if alive, closing in, breathing, alive with intent. I realized the mine didn't just trap bodies, it trapped souls, feeding on fear, despair, and isolation. I tried to scream, tried to run, but my legs moved slowly, as if the shadows themselves were dragging me toward the unknown depths. And I could feel the presence right behind me, waiting. By the 6th hour, exhaustion and fear merged into paralysis. Every nerve in my body screamed, yet I could not stop moving. The mine had become a labyrinth, twisting and shifting, the walls rearranging themselves to keep me inside. The whispers now surrounded me completely, echoing from every crevice, chanting my name alongside words older than the mine itself. "You cannot leave. You belong to the darkness." At 11:47 p.m., I reached a junction where tunnels intersected in impossible angles. From one shaft, the elongated figure appeared again, gliding silently toward me. Its face was featureless, yet I felt its gaze pierce my mind. Behind it, shapes moved too fast to track, shadows writhing and twisting, reaching with unnatural limbs. My flashlight flickered and died again, plunging me into total darkness. The mind pulsed like a heart, and I could feel it testing me, pressing against my sanity. Every instinct screamed to escape, but the very air seemed to resist my movement. I understood, with terrifying clarity, that this place was no accident. The mine was alive, and it had claimed me. By the 7th hour, sheer terror had hollowed me out. The mine no longer felt like a tunnel through rock. It was a living, breathing entity, a predator stalking its prey. Every step I took was mirrored by sounds that shouldn't exist. Footfalls echoing in impossible patterns, scraping and dragging noises that sent chills down my spine. The whispers had evolved into sentences now, sinister and deliberate. "We've waited. Now you belong. Forever." At 11:47 p.m., I rounded a sharp bend and the tunnel opened into a massive cavern. My flashlight flickered and illuminated a scene that stole my breath. Hundreds of shadowy forms twisted into grotesque shapes, frozen mid-motion, as if trapped in the mine for centuries. The elongated, featureless figure moved among them, inspecting each shadow before moving on. It turned toward me, head tilting unnaturally, and the temperature dropped so sharply I could see my own breath. Panic clawed at my mind, but instinct forced me to move forward, deeper into the cavern. The shadows seemed to react, reaching toward me with hands made of darkness, grasping, curling, waiting to pull me into their eternal torment. I understood then that the mine was not just haunted. It was a living vault of souls, and I was about to be added to its collection. By the 8th hour, desperation had consumed me. My flashlight was dead, and the cavern was plunged into absolute darkness, broken only by faint glimmers from phosphorescent minerals in the rock. Every movement felt watched, every breath echoed unnaturally, as if the mine itself were mocking me. At 11:47 p.m., the elongated figure glided toward me, its movements impossibly smooth, limbs bending like liquid. And the whispers had transformed into a guttural chorus that vibrated inside my skull. You belong? The mine keeps all? I stumbled backward, tripping over broken timbers, my hands brushing against cold stone walls that seemed to pulse beneath my touch. The shadows of the trapped souls stretched and writhed toward me, their distorted faces twisting in silent screams. My mind screamed for escape, but instinct and fear drove me forward, toward a narrow tunnel I hadn't seen before. The air grew heavier with each step, pressing down on my chest as if the mine itself sought to crush me. Every instinct told me I should flee, yet I felt pulled toward the unknown depths. The mine had revealed its hunger, and I was now its prey, teetering on the edge of something far older, far darker, and far more merciless than I could comprehend. By the 9th hour, I was broken, trapped in the mine's twisted embrace. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating weight that pressed into my skull and chest. Every sound, the distant drip of water, the scrape of rock, the faint shuffle of unseen feet, felt amplified, echoing through the cavern like a symphony of dread. I realized the mine had become a predator, and I was its prey. At 11:47 p.m., the elongated, faceless figure emerged again, gliding silently through the shadows. Behind it, hundreds of distorted silhouettes began to stir, twisting unnaturally, limbs bending and contorting as if animated by some dark force. The whispers became a deafening chorus, commanding me, "You belong. You belong. You belong." I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if the mine itself were holding me in place. The shadows extended, wrapping around my arms and legs, coiling like living ropes. Panic surged, but the more I struggled, the stronger they became. My mind screamed in terror, realizing that escape was impossible, and the mine's hunger was insatiable. I was not just trapped, I was being claimed, pulled slowly into the darkness where countless others had vanished before me, swallowed by the living shadows of the abandoned mine. By the 10th hour, I had almost surrendered to the mine's relentless grip. The air was thick with cold, damp terror, and the whispers had merged into a single, all-encompassing chant that filled my mind. You belong to the mine, forever. At 11:47 p.m., I stumbled into the deepest chamber, a vast underground hollow where the ceiling disappeared into darkness. Shadows of past victims twisted and writhed, their distorted faces and elongated limbs frozen in eternal torment. The faceless figure loomed above them, surveying the cavern with quiet, terrible authority. I tried to scream, to flee, but the walls themselves seemed to pulse and shift, guiding me toward the center. The shadows coiled around me, tugging at my arms and legs, pressing into my chest, stealing my strength. My flashlight had long since died, and my senses were flooded with the mine's dark presence. Then, the last thing I remember was a cold, invisible hand gripping my mind. Everything went black, and I became part of the mine. Another whisper, another shadow, trapped for eternity in its dark, twisting labyrinth. The abandoned mine still waits, and it always will. As our journey through the most disturbing Canadian small-town horror stories comes to an end, one truth becomes painfully clear. Darkness hides where we least expect it. From the icy forests and forgotten mines to abandoned lighthouses and desolate homes, these places have swallowed ordinary people whole, leaving behind whispers, shadows, and memories that refuse to fade. What ties them together is not just the terror, but the feeling that the ordinary world we trust so blindly can twist into something incomprehensible. Every creak, every flicker of light, every shadow in the corner of your eye carries a story. Stories of fear that are real, documented, and haunting beyond imagination. Perhaps the most frightening part is that these horrors are not just tales. They are echoes of places where the line between life and darkness has been erased. So next time you walk past a lonely building, a foggy road, or a seemingly harmless trail, remember, something might be watching, waiting, and it remembers every soul that wanders too close. Thank you for joining me on this journey into terror. If you've survived until now, know that the shadows are always closer than they seem. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.